Farm for Profit Podcast. Take a listen, have a blast. Farm for Profit Podcast. Learn about farming while having a laugh. Farm for Profit Podcast.
Hey, listeners, welcome back to the Farm for Profit Podcast. This is Tanner.
This is Corey.
And Dave's here.
Remember, 515-207-9640. That's how you connect with us. That's how you share ideas for topics and discussions, just like the one we're talking about today. The topic we're going to cover is a repeat topic. Covered it 3 or 4 different times, but every time we cover it, we learn something new, and it's important and much asked for.
Yeah, I feel like it's, even though we've covered it, I feel like it's been a while since we have, and it's probably going to be pretty important going forward here.
It's pretty timely, right? At least here in the state of Iowa, right, Dave? We have cash rent terminations sent out
September
by
1st.
September 1st. Is that in other states too, or just Iowa?
They are, but other states have different dates.
Okay. So it's just timely. So coming out here in August, just ahead of when that termination date comes, our discussion on negotiations is going to be very timely. So excited to welcome our guest today. She is, as Dave said, crushing it in the world of negotiation. Attia Qureshi. Get that? Yeah, listeners.
Yeah.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I am very happy to be here.
You have a lot of unique ties to this topic. But first of all, I want to learn about your tie to agriculture before we go back to your experience in negotiations.
Yes, I actually am shockingly uniquely suited, I think, for this particular podcast because I joined a farming family through marriage several years ago. So my husband is a cherry and apple farmer. He is 6th generation. So now we have a 1-year-old son who is 7th generation up here in northern Michigan. So I have become deeply enmeshed in farm life. Specifically for fruit farming.
Our buddy Ryan's going to like this too because
He is.
Yeah, big Michigan apple grower.
Yes, we just kind of did our 6 month, what half of the year of 2025 looks like as far as listenership goes. And Michigan cracked the top 10 states.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we were a little surprised and appreciative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to have to start throwing some shade at Michigan. We never find anything bad to say about Michigan. It's always Nebraska,
It's Nebraska.
Illinois,
Uh-huh.
Minnesota.
I mean, we got a lot of farms here in Michigan, so I'm glad to hear that you've got listeners.
So you seem surprised that you married into agriculture.
I am shocked. So my background is very business oriented. I went after graduating from University of Michigan. I went and worked in management consulting out in San Francisco. I worked for a couple of tech startups and was in the Silicon Valley world in San Francisco and then Denver. And then I ended up back at MIT in Cambridge to do my master's. And that's where I came across the world of negotiation and conflict resolution. Absolutely fell in love with it. Thought I would stay there because there's a huge community of practitioners out there. And then I met my husband. And while I grew up in Southeast Michigan, close to Ann Arbor, I didn't expect to be in Michigan, much less rural Michigan, on cherry and apple farms. So I am just as surprised as maybe you are that that's where I ended up. But actually, I love it. I do. I can work remotely part of the time. I can be on the farm in the summer, and then I can also travel to my clients for work.
Like the song says, fell for the Southern boy drawl and the overalls, or just the rope hat? Maybe just the rope hat.
It's pretty idyllic.
Do Michiganders have a
Michiganders?
Is that like a goose?
Is that
For
what
the
you're-
gander or for
is
the
that-
goose? Yeah.
We are. You're right. It is a Michigander.
Really?
Yeah,
Yes.
you guys doubt me. Come on.
I do doubt you quite a bit.
Do Michiganders have an accent? Are they
You
close
tell
enough
me.
to Canada?
I think there's 2 Michigans, right? There's the Upper Peninsula, and then there's the other Michigan.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, it's true.
and there's probably different accents there.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah. We might have to have her husband on sometime to learn
Yeah.
that how do you get one of these city girls to come out to the farm.
He
must be the ultimate
negotiator. I was going to say, there's a...
You ready to make that last pass? Listen up. XR5 KSB from Ag Explorer isn't just another jug. It's built to match exactly what your crop wants when it wants it. This isn't guesswork. It's 25 years of boots on the ground, education-first agronomy. These folks walk fields, explain the why, and build programs that actually work. Want to finish strong? This is your pass. Let's go.
Honestly, it's true. I mean, look at the whole thing that he has accomplished and spun together. You could have a whole podcast on dating, farmer dating life.
There we get a new sponsor there.
FarmersOnly.com.
FarmersOnly.com. Negotiation tactics.
Negotiation tactics.
And not only did he get her to come to the farm, but also brought tangible skills that are extremely valuable to any business.
Yeah.
So let's now kind of unwind. You did talk high level of your background and your qualifications on the topic of negotiation. Let's kind of step through that process as to how you gain that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started off within my background of management consulting and working in Silicon Valley. I think I started seeing all of the different negotiations and conflict that took place within organizations themselves. And I found that to be fascinating. And then when I ended up doing my master's at MIT, I started working with the professor there who still teaches negotiation. And I started working with him. I became his TA. And then I started consulting with him separately with corporate clients. So I started my own consulting practice where I was building up my base for working and going into corporate organizations, a lot of tech organizations, and then family businesses, because I've been part of a family business. My husband has a family business, so I have a unique background when it comes to understanding those even trickier dynamics. So any organization that's growing quickly, but within those realms, end up being my specialty. And so I started going through that process while I was at MIT, built up my consulting practice, and ended up teaching alongside that professor at MIT. But then, like we mentioned, when my husband came along, I realized, oh, you can't easily move orchards, and let me try and see how Michigan works out for me. And I landed at the University of Michigan. So I also now teach at the University of Michigan, specifically teaching master's students within the public policy school, negotiation and conflict resolution skills. And then another piece of that, aside from my teaching, my consulting practice, I've also done conflict resolution and negotiation work in Colombia with farmers there, who the government has created a program trying to get farmers in Colombia to stop producing coca for cocaine production. And they're gathering farmers into cooperatives and subsidizing them to produce other crops, which is obviously a very high conflict zone with a lot of very delicate negotiations. So I've gone there and helped farmers there and really been in the weeds of it with them, helping them navigate that situation.
Are those negotiations successful?
Yes.
Is the production decreasing?
The production is decreasing. The farmers are successfully transitioning to other crops. It certainly isn't a straightforward path, though. There are times where if they don't have the opportunity to figure out how to work together in a cooperative, some farmers will just fall off and go back to coca production because it's much more challenging to work together on a different crop, because cartels will allow you to grow coca on a small plot of land and they'll come pick up the coca and just hand you money. So it's a pretty easy way of crop production, except that every decade or so they'll come in and blow down an entire town if you push back at all, and kind of kill everybody in the town to remind them that they're in charge. So that's the downside, which is a pretty intense downside that a lot of the farmers mentioned to me as something that really motivated them to transition away.
Whoa, I didn't expect to talk about that today.
You know, we need to find a different crop here in Iowa.
Oh, you're going to start growing coca?
Can we grow it here? I don't. Probably not.
We'll have to get one
That's
of
right,
our
that's-
friends on.
Talk about a new cash market.
I warned you about the downside, so you
Yeah.
can't blame me.
And we can fight back here, right? Yeah.
MIT to the University of Michigan.
What
an asset.
area of college is negotiations? Like what college program is that?
It's within the business school. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a good question. But my master's program was really interesting. It was based on user-centered design. So it was split a little bit. And I think that gives me a slightly different perspective because user-centered design focuses on what does the other person need for something to be successful. And that's really, when you tie that to negotiation, you become very successful in a negotiation if you can figure out what the other side needs. Because no one is going to be okay with a one-sided deal. Even if you are able to make a handshake deal and it's heavily favored in your side, once you walk away, are they going to hold up to it or not? So one of the biggest keys in a negotiation is figuring out what's going to work for them. And then how do I integrate that with what works for me? And that was part of my program in my master's, which I like to incorporate quite a bit with my consulting work.
That makes sense. Dave, you probably deal with negotiations more than any of us on the land side of things. You're selling stuff all the time. Is that true? That you got to figure out what the other party wants?
Sometimes it's very timely here. I got a call about 8 o'clock last night from a gentleman we're trying to negotiate an easement with that basically told me to get bent, screw off, and I hope you're not trying to make a real estate career because I'm going to crush you. It was basically the message. So it turned to a very one-sided conversation, and this is called eminent domain. We're going to take it.
That's not a lot of negotiation.
Nope. We tried. We tried the negotiation. We tried to even offer money, cash, try to find out what he wanted, and it didn't work.
And
man.
farmers don't like the word. Landowners don't like the word eminent domain. That's a pretty negative connotation. But don't you have to have a reason to use eminent domain? Right?
Correct. Yep. Public benefit, and in this case, the easement gave that benefit there.
Okay.
Interesting. We get to talk about a lot of things today, but one word that you already brought up is you get to teach students negotiation skills.
Yeah.
This is something that I think our audience could benefit from as well. So what are some of the skills that go along with negotiating?
That's a great question. The framework that I really like to use within negotiation is the 7 elements framework. So if I really briefly go through the 7 elements, we start with interests. So my interests, what do I care about? And your interests, what do you care about? So David, you were just talking about it with the easement. I need an easement. The landowner is like, absolutely not. I don't want an easement through my property. Now, there are deeper interests there as well. And so understanding those interests on both parties really helps to figure out how you can have a successful negotiation. Then we also have options. Options are, what can we do together? Options on the table. What can we do together to figure out a way to make the deal work? Then we have criteria or legitimacy. What can I bring? What data can I bring externally that provides legitimacy to the number or the, offer that I'm making? We have communication. So communication is often one we forget about, which I'll talk about more later, but how am I communicating to them? What questions am I asking to get the information I need from them? Relationship. I think one of the biggest misses we have in negotiations, especially within farming, is thinking through relationships with other people, whether it's vendors, whether it's big corporations that we have to work with regularly, or our other farmers and neighbors that we have to work with. And then we have alternatives and commitment. So alternatives are off the table. What do I do if I can't make a deal here? So again, back to David's quick example, eminent domain was the alternative. And then lastly, we have commitment. So I mentioned this, but if it's a purely one-sided deal, that often means that people will likely back away from the deal after you leave the table. So how are you making sure that both parties uphold the deal that has been committed to? So
Can I
that
use
is
my example here?
yeah, please.
So in this scenario, you said, what was the first one?
Interest.
Interest. So in this case, the neighboring farmer was also one to buy the farm that we were selling. He was not the high bidder. We sold it to someone else. So when we sold it to someone else, of course, then that made him bristle up that no, he does not want to give an easement across his property. We found out that his interest was that he did not want somebody developing back there. So we tried to negotiate with him and say, tell you what, let's make an easement and we'll write in the easement that guaranteed nobody will develop back there. So we tried to appeal to what he was looking for. Oh, yeah, and he didn't want any corporate hunting. So, okay, we wrote in the easement, no corporate hunting. We're really just using this for our own, for the guy that was buying it. Move forward, okay, we got a deal. Shook a hand. There was money involved. We ended up getting eminent domain committee. They normally determine, what is this worth? So we got outside opinions of what is this worth, which you kind of mentioned.
Yeah.
And at that committee meeting, we basically made a handshake deal that, okay, let's do it because he'd rather have the interest of not commercial developments in the back rather than eminent domain telling him what he can do. But then we left the table. It's been 4.5 weeks, and we have no answer, no signed documents, no anything. So we're back to, you have 1 week, otherwise we're going back to eminent domain.
So the commitment was weak.
The commitment was weak.
Yeah. It's interesting what you started off with, and this is a little bit of the relational piece, but also deeply understanding his interests. Underneath the relationship and interests are often emotions. And we can forget about the emotion that comes into play with a negotiation. So what you said is really fascinating to me, where he wanted to buy the property but didn't end up being able to. He wasn't the highest bidder. So he's holding resentment to that. And then not only was he not the highest bidder, but this new owner gets to come through his property. So it's a little bit of a double whammy, probably to his pride.
Mm-hmm.
And that sitting deep inside of him, not getting resolved or addressed, makes it so he's putting roadblock after roadblock up in your negotiation.
I was going to use the term stonewalling. That's where we're at.
Well, and this is like, when you decided that you wanted to start selling farms, did you think that you would ever be negotiating or try for an easement? Like, your job is to sell the farm, not get an easement.
That's correct.
Right?
Lots of hats you wear.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Wow. So those 7 elements are some of the key pillars that you teach in your curriculum to these business students. Now, right now, Corey, right, we're talking about contracts that you've got in place that provide you some upside as far as grain sales goes. We know this year, Attia, that we are probably looking at a good crop, maybe not such great prices, and some of the information that we have on our side indicates that inputs are still going to be relatively expensive compared to the value of the crop that we're growing. Corey, would you say it's important now more than ever, or is it just always important to be a good negotiator?
Well, it's always important. It's if you take the grain marketing mentality, right? When corn's $7, everybody's making money. When corn's $4, you can make money, but you got to try a lot harder. But why shouldn't you go get that lot? If you could market it for $7.30 instead of $6.90, you're making better decisions for your farm. You're being more profitable. It's just as important.
In your operation, where do you think you have the most ability to negotiate?
Inputs. There's negotiation skills. On the grain marketing side, right? Chicago Board of Trade sets the price. But you can decide who you sell to, when you sell it, and you can, if you have good relationships with your grain buyers, the posted basis is not the basis that you can get. You can almost always get a better basis.
Okay. Now, on the apple and cherry side, is it the same like that, or are there more opportunities when you go to sell the good?
There are more opportunities because it's not posted in the same way. Now, what's interesting is that there are 2 markets. There's the processing market and there's the fresh market. So the processing market is the one that you can sell more volume to because they're processing the fruit for frozen cherries or cherry products or applesauce, for example. And then the fresh market is going to the grocery stores. So when you have an intermediary with the processing market, which unfortunately has consolidated, which we have seen right recently for my husband, that creates a really big problem because with the consolidation, they can squeeze the farmers incredibly low on the price per pound. So much so that in the past couple of years, we have one big processor left in the Midwest. The rest are out in California. And a lot of farmers are getting out of the business because they've just gotten squeezed way too low. And interestingly, a lot of times that happens when you have private equity companies coming in. They really try to squeeze the margins out of businesses that they see, just like this one. And my husband was, what we call a 100% grower. So they had committed 100% of their processing crop to this processor. But the processor doesn't make a commitment back other than to buy the product, but not giving a commitment to the price. And they just go lower and lower and lower and lower at a point where it's not even worth producing it anymore.
Ouch.
So one of the things I didn't hear you say in your 7 steps, if we refer back to Donald Trump's book, The Art of the Deal, he talks about leverage. I didn't hear anywhere that you said leverage in there. And what I just heard from your last comments was they leveraged people right out of the business because they could. Yeah. In Corey's instance, if the farmland owner can leverage the fact that somebody else will buy it, somebody else will rent it, that keeps cash rent price high. So although there's leverage on the side of the grower that says, look, I can't do this anymore at this price. There might be other people that will step in your place and rent that ground from you. So it's a very touchy subject when it comes to farmers. You don't want to step on others' toes, but there's normally 5 guys right behind you that'll probably pick up that cash rent at the level that you were dropping.
That's exactly true. And it's really, I think that concept is fascinating, the idea of leverage, because the processor, for example, it feels like they have all of the power in the situation. But this year, for example, has been a really tricky growing year. There was a late freeze with the crop, so a lot of people lost their crop, and then there was hail. So for a lot of, at least Michigan and in the Midwest in general, a lot of people lost their entire crop. So now the processor is in a bind because they're not getting the volume they need for production. So they've actually come back to my husband asking if he will sell to them at a significantly higher price than they've offered in the last 5 years. So leverage exists, but it doesn't always exist. And I think that farmers in particular have a much longer term view than any other industry I've ever seen. I've worked with several other industries, and farmers just have to have a longer term view than any other organization, which means that they have to be much more strategic. And with that long-term view, these PE companies, I think they come in and they don't realize that because you don't know about the cycles within farming the way that farmers do. And the piece that I think combats leverage is relationship. Because if you use your leverage and destroy relationships, and eventually people always come back around. You always need someone. Even if you burn the bridge with them back in the day, I've learned, especially in farming, people always come back around. The need is always there at some point or another. It might not be for 5 years, but year 6 or 7, it shows up again. And I think that that's what, I mentioned at the beginning, relationships, we forget about them in negotiations, but they're so incredibly important, especially in farming because of that long-term view.
Yeah, I was going to highlight that I think relationships is probably one of the most important in farming, whether good or bad. I mean, I've heard stories of don't ever rent the farm to this family because great grandpa screwed the other great grandpa in some poker game, like generations ago, but they're still holding a grudge.
Well, you've brought this up multiple times. I mean, Corey's our CTO, Chief Talent Officer, but I think he could be Farm for Profit's Chief Relationship Officer because that's something that you've demonstrated as a huge value to our team early on. But
I'm terrible at negotiations.
You are, but you hold that piece. You hold that piece of leverage, though, that you've identified that important person to have a relationship with a lot of our advertisers. And it sounds like you're doing the same thing with your grain buyers, because what I wrote down when Dave brought up leverage was, when does the farmer gain leverage? You kind of described weather as one thing.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I mean, the only other leverage you have for your corn and soybeans is, instead of going to ADM in Des Moines, you could go to Iowa Falls.
Falls.
You could go to the elevator. I mean, that's like the only leverage you have, is you can take it to multiple.
A little less on the bean side, but corn a lot more ethanol plants and end users. I guess
there's some other leverage techniques out there for the farmer. I've had specific people call to rent farms. I only want to rent to an organic guy. So now the organic guys have leverage over all of the commercial producers, because the mentality that the landowner, absentee landowner, maybe I'll use California or Texas or Vermont, wherever, they've read something and they want organic. They want nothing sprayed. So now you have a leg up. If you're utilizing programs like carbon intensity score, 45Z, or any of that, to where you might be able to have a leg up, you can use that as leverage to outdo the neighbor farmer. You might be able to get a little bit more, but that's because you're studying the programs.
Yeah, it's interesting. What do you think about that, Attia?
Well, I think that's really fascinating, because what I hear is you're identifying a unique value proposition for your farm. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. So when I was talking about my husband with the processing, he's pivoted to the fresh market, but specifically his value proposition is really high quality and local. So those are a couple of items that people, at least within fruit farming, really care about. But I love what David's saying, where you can think about organic. You can think, I mean, local might still apply in certain aspects for other farming businesses, based on your practices and utilizing energy programs. There are a lot of different ways to set yourself apart, to showcase value in a slightly different way. But then I would also circle back to what Corey said about relationships. That provides leverage as well. Because if you are the person that people like to deal with, and you are reliable and trustworthy, and you follow through on your commitments, that in itself is huge leverage too, because people want to work with that type of person. They don't want someone who is chaotic and changes all the time. And yeah, we get a good price this year, but what happens next year?
So I've brought up several things on the more of the input and the sales side, but I think probably the biggest thing you're wanting to get out of this, or what I guess I don't know, but I'm guessing, is probably rent negotiations or land negotiations.
Well, one thing that Attia and I talked about that has worked really well for Farm for Profit and our listeners in the past is to kind of go through a couple of examples. And I do think cash rent land availability is one that we should jump into as a specific way. How can we potentially gain some experience today for those types of conversations? So for the listeners that are not in the Midwest, to kind of set the table, in Iowa, at least in our area, cash rent negotiations typically happen when a lease termination is delivered prior to September 1st, and or in a relationship with your landlord, in and amongst those times. Dave sells a farm to a new landowner. If they're absentee, has to find a potentially new tenant to negotiate those terms. But cash rent gives you access to that farm ground. Cash rent, or access to that land, comes in various different ways. Pure cash, exchange of bushels, crop share percentage of some kind,
flex leases,
and any and all of the between. So just to kind of set that table, that's what we want to talk through here. So Attia, if we think about, we've got a landlord that we've known for just a couple of years, relatively new. We might be short on the relationship side of things. They just served us termination notice with the intent to raise our cash rent.
Two things I want to premise. Because you get a termination doesn't mean that they actually want to terminate you. A lot of times it does, but it just means that they want to come back to the table to negotiate, like go up or down or whatever. You as a farmer can serve lease termination because you want to renegotiate, right? And then I wanted to say there's probably two different landowners There's probably the absentee landowner that's very absentee or very far removed from agriculture, very money driven. And then there also is the people that are still very tied to the small towns and around the area and are more probably relationship driven. So there's a couple different things that to lay it out there.
Mm-hmm.
And just because the termination is served in Iowa, anyway, for you listeners, September 1st is when it's served by and signed, but most leases go March to March. So it doesn't mean you're kicked off the property right now. It means in next March, renegotiate something.
Before then.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you suggest to our listeners? We've received this notice, and now what would be a best first step for us to try and start with a leg up?
Yes. I have 3 of the 7 elements that are crossing my mind. I have relationship, I have criteria or the legitimacy piece, and then I also have interests. Now, I want
the one I thought.
Sorry?
You missed the one I thought you were going to say. Keep going.
Which one were you thinking?
Communication.
Oh, yes. Yes. Communication. Well, it's interesting. I often tie, that's a great one. I often tie communication directly into interests because communication is actually so crucial in understanding what they want. That's actually, you're spot on. But I end up merging those two. So first I want to take a step back. I understand that we are light on relationship. If there is an opportunity, I would say knowing that these notices can get served starting late summer, fall, what can we do winter, spring, and summer to build that relationship? Now, it sounds like it's a lot easier with someone who has the ties to the small town, but the opportunity still exists with the absentee landowner. And I would urge listeners to think about, what am I going to do starting this winter, thinking about the fact that this might come up for me next September? Because I think there's a huge opportunity to have that forethought and be prepared for the next September. I understand that we're coming up to September right now, and I will address that, but I do think it's also valuable to be thinking about it once you do sign your lease for the next year. Whether you are with the absentee landowner, thinking through how to make connections with them. Are you sending them updates? Are you communicating with them to understand what they care about? What type of updates would they want? What type, is there anything that you can send them? We talk about within relationship building, the idea of reciprocity. And I can't tell you how powerful it is just to send a holiday card. It is incredibly impactful. There is a study that was done that a family sent out holiday cards to people they didn't know. 100 people they didn't know. They just sent a holiday card. And I can't remember the percentage, but a massive percentage of them started sending holiday cards back, even though they didn't know each other. But the idea of reciprocity is so powerful that they were like, oh my gosh, we're getting this card and we have to respond. So just small things like that up front and thinking about, can I send them, if I'm a bean farmer, can I send them some cool beans, right? In a cute jar or a holiday card or yeah, it's really powerful, and it doesn't have to be expensive, but small items that build that relationship can go a huge way. So then,
well, while we're on that topic, can I interject here? What I'm hearing is retention. We do a lot of fundraising with my auction firm, and we always talk about donor retention. They gave last year, the relationship was good. How do we keep that relationship going? So maybe address it while you're on it. How does Corey keep the relationships other than a gift or a Christmas card? Is there such a thing as tenant retention?
I would say, other than small gifts and a holiday card, communication is massive, right? What type of communication do they appreciate? Do they want to know from Corey, like, this is, a quick update. This is what we're doing during the winter season. This is what we're doing during the spring season. It's actually amazing to me, for especially absentee landowners, how much they like to be kept in the loop a small way about farming practices, because it makes them feel a little bit like a farmer.
What a special opportunity for you listeners. Now through the end of August, we have the Maya 3x3x3 campaign.
What's 3x3x3?
you get 3% financing, 3-year parts and warranty, or the third option is if you want to pay cash, you get 3 different kinds of discounts.
Yeah, you can get $5,000 off of an 8-row, $7,500 off a 12-row, or $10,000 off a 16-row from Maya Cornheads. Go to mayacornheads.com or slide into our DMs and we'll hook you up with the closest dealer.
And
This
they
was
like
the whole
that.
reason that I started a Facebook page
I got that in my note.
before really anyone was starting Facebook farm pages. Like before Zach Johnson was putting stuff on YouTube.
Yeah.
I was like, I need to start documenting this and the reason being was because I started writing a newsletter for my landlords and had pictures and all that. And I sent a few out and I'm like, why don't I just post this daily? And then everyone can watch, right? Not just my landlords. They can keep up, but they get that.
I had wrote that down because the very first interview that we had Corey on the podcast was because of his social media and what he was doing with that family page. And then when you mentioned the newsletter, it was quite interesting because if somebody wants to be attached to the farm, yeah, it's extra work for you. Maybe you, your spouse, your team member, whatever it is. But how cool would it be if you're a landowner, Dave, to get an email that said, crops planted in the ground. We got that there. This is the best the soil's worked up in years. We also had 2 inches of rain over the last 30 days. And by the way, my kid broke her foot, or whatever your newsletter is. And now all of a sudden, you're not a number.
What I do as a farm manager is I actually started doing, if you have a drone, Corey, you should do this. You can use the panoramic feature, and it's like a 3D walkthrough tour of the house. How do we make the absentee landowner feel like they're on the farm is do a panoramic drone picture after the crops are planted. So I let them see, feel, zoom, travel around the farm virtually through a software so that they get a drift of what was planted, even though they're not there.
Your farm's really wet. It needs tile. We need to lower the
Yeah, I know, right?
I love this. I feel like I'm learning a lot that I'm going to take back to my husband from this. But that's exactly right. You all know exactly how to keep people engaged, and that engagement and those touch points are so beneficial to the idea of retention that you're saying.
Okay, so we've identified that there's a lot that we can be doing ahead of time to kind of build up that relationship, understand their interests, and figure out the criteria for this. Now to kind of wrap up this topic, we're into negotiations right now.
Yes, we're in it.
We've identified that relationship out the window. It matters about dollars.
Yep.
What advice do you have for a grower that is pretty much utilized every tool you can think of, and now it's just down to dollars?
Yep. That's a great question. So this comes to understanding their interests and the combination of that with communication and then criteria or the legitimacy. So first, asking questions to understand what they are looking for is incredibly powerful. Because if they want to renegotiate this contract, the more information we can get, the better. Where are you trying to end up? What is the purpose of this renegotiation? What are you looking for when it comes to the land itself? Trying to understand, yes, they want a higher rent, but is there anything else they care about? Because if we come back to that idea of leverage, are there pieces that we can add in that create value for them that is not expensive for us? Because while it does come to dollars, and again, back to the idea of leverage, but underneath the idea with relationship, people have emotional needs as well. So what emotional needs do they have in addition to the dollars? Do they have a kid who loves tractors? I mean, honestly, I don't know a kid who doesn't love tractors.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. You're looking at 3 of them right here.
Exactly. And is that something that you want to visit the farm? Like, can we give you a really cool farm tour? There are so many different things underneath a negotiation if you can ask questions to understand what the other person cares about other than the dollar. So figuring out those pieces and how you might be able to meet different needs for them that meet more than just the dollar number can add a ton of value to a negotiation. But let's talk about when you get to the dollar itself, because at the end of the day, while all those pieces can make a difference in the negotiation, the dollar matters.
Corey, is that why you got your chemical applicator's license to become a pool boy for all your old lady tenants that you?
That right, I thought you were doing.
Okay, Corey the pool boy / farmer.
That's the next
Very
podcast.
saltwater pool.
Saltwater. There you go.
So let's and when it comes to the dollar itself, I find this idea of legitimacy or criteria or external data to be incredibly powerful. I actually find it powerful in any negotiation because we can all get really nervous in a negotiation. Corey said, I'm great on the relational side, but I'm really bad at the negotiation piece. And we all to a certain extent feel anxiety around a negotiation. And what can help soothe that anxiety is figuring out what data is available to help me figure out what's fair. Because at the end of the day, people want to feel like they're getting a fair deal. They want to feel like they are coming to terms that maybe not is perfect for everybody, but feels fair to everybody. So give me an example of a per acre value range.
Well, just in case our landlords are listening, it's like $180 to $200.
Sounds good.
I have an average in Iowa that it's about $285 per acre on most of the good ground. And we do have a couple resources just to clue you in. Iowa State University puts out a land values survey for cash rent, a cash rent survey every year. And many
it's a year behind.
Landlords use that.
Yeah.
But as a guy that does it on the other side, sometimes I don't feel it's up to date. And then some landlords don't either, and they start calling.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That's the cheapest I have ever heard Dave say a rent, ever. I've never heard you say a rent under $300.
It's $4.
So it must be coming down.
$4 per CSR.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I actually love that because that itself is external data that people can go and find. Because who can argue with Iowa State saying, "Hey, we are doing this research as a institution, and we are coming up with this number that we think is fair," and that's just a starting point. It doesn't have to be where you end up, but there's probably a range around that 285 number. So perhaps with really profitable, really high value land, it can be higher, or with poorer soil, it could be lower. Mm-hmm. So what you find is a range. So maybe that range ends up being 250 to 350, just for the sake of our example. Now,
I will say Iowa State does give you a range for low, medium, and high quality.
Amazing.
And
Perfect.
per county.
My problem with their deal is it's a survey. Surveys are people's opinions. And I want factual data. So if I took to an auction,
they're sending that to people that either cash rent ground or cash rent their ground out. So by law of averages, you can have people go in and put outliers, high and low, because I know where you're going with this, because he's going to say little old ladies have little sweetheart deals with their son or their grandson or whatever, and it's only $100.
And you've got farmers that.
But you also have farmers that are paying $500 an acre to guys like you managing farms wanting all the dollars. Yeah. So it all averages out at the end, right? That's where you come to the.
I was going to say the farmers that don't want the survey numbers to be high for when it comes out, and they purposely report low too.
Yeah, but Dave's in there too going, no, it's
I wish we had
$600.
averages though, not opinions.
Yeah, I understand that. And I don't know if there's availability. My husband actually had to look at some data for this exact reason last year for understanding farm land lease value. And he went to a couple of different sources. He went to someone who does property assessments. So trying to understand, he does it specifically for property. What is the value of this property? He also went to a agricultural economist who has his PhD, saying, "Hey, what do you think land value is based on your understanding?" So what he did was found a few different pieces of data, and that can help supplement the single source. So Iowa State has one piece of data, but there are a couple of other pieces that you can use to supplement it, because that could help you further define your range. So if Iowa State's range is 250 to 350, but then all of a sudden you get more information and it ends up being 200 to 500, that's really helpful. Now, here's where the negotiation comes in, because if you are the farmer who's trying to get the best price for the lease. And of course, the landowner is trying to get the best price. But a lot of people don't do their research this diligently. So, first step when it comes to figuring out the number and coming in strong is doing the research to get the data. And so I'm the farmer and I want to negotiate a really good rate. I know the range is 200 to 500. I'm coming in at the lowest end of the range, or whatever end of the range is best for me. And we call that anchoring. We call it anchoring, and I am anchoring the negotiation at $200. And I can support that number because I have background and data that I can comfortably share to support it. Now, of course, it's going to be a discussion because they're coming back with a different perspective. But you know that what's fair is somewhere in that range. And you also know it's not the best quality land. So you're going to narrow that range to really be from 200 to 350 because it's just not high quality enough to hit the other part. So you have your range, you're starting at the range that's most beneficial to you, and you're narrowing that range on what makes sense based on different parameters. So now you have a scope for the negotiation and a price point to work within. But the power of anchoring means that you're starting from 200. If you let them start, you might be starting from 400 and you're trying to chip away from 400. But now they're trying to raise you from 200. And so you might end up at 250. But if you start at 400, are you going to end up at 350 instead?
Right. Is there a factor of respect? Like you could actually lowball them and make them mad? You know, I'm anchoring down here hoping to get a little bit higher than that, but you piss them off and they just go away.
Yes. And that's where I think that if you do anchor them, you want to anchor them within the data. So you don't want to anchor them at a point that isn't supported by data, because if you can provide the supporting evidence for why 200 could make sense, I don't think they're going to be upset with you. If you anchor at 150, but you don't have any supporting evidence, absolutely, they could throw out their hands and be like, I don't think that.
You're ripping them off.
Yeah, exactly. But you're not ripping them off because you're providing external data to support your number.
Interesting. Wow. I already appreciate that you've added more clarity to some of these thought processes than what we've had in the past. Because I think some of the interviews we've done in the past would have gone straight to, well, if you can't negotiate the dollar, maybe you can offer a longer contract. Or if you can't do a longer contract and the dollar is non-negotiable, maybe you can say, I'm only going to do half of it in March and half of it in December, or whatever it is to manipulate. So our listeners have already heard that advice. So this is neat to kind of think of, there's still external factors even when the negotiation seems like it's only about dollars.
Let me bridge off of what Corey was saying and give an example and see what your thoughts are on this. I had a client the other day that came to me and said, hey, we would like a number on the farm. So as an appraiser, we gave him a number of, we give him a range, high, medium, and low, based on comparable sales. I don't know which number they chose, the high, medium, or the low. They went to the tenant and said, would you like to buy it? Prior to hiring us as a real estate firm. Happens all the time. So I literally just gave them the info they needed to go sell it by themselves. They went to the tenant and said, hey, tenant, will you buy it? And this is where we've had this conversation before. Who fires first? Okay. And they said, make us an offer. Well, they made an offer. And it was at the bottom end of the range of where I gave them. So then they called us back and they said, hey, go ahead and list the farm. We listed the farm. Well, sure enough, the same tenant offered us money. Of course, realtors take a commission in the middle. So we took a commission in the middle, and they came up to the top price. So I talked with both sides of it, and I said, why didn't you just come up? If you were willing to give that much to start with, why didn't you just come up? well, I mean, we tried to have a communication, but they really didn't tell us what they wanted. And we would have gave that much, but they never really asked for it. And so back to communication, I think if they'd had a conversation, that's what I become in the middle as the realtor, is the communicator between both of them. But then I'm the martyr because I'm the guy taking commission in the middle. I think oftentimes that if one would lay your cards on the table. And I think we've had this in a conversation before. Lay your cards on the table to let them know what our expectations are. Mm-hmm. If Corey wants to rent a farm, I can't give $400. I will give you $350. Yeah. That's where I think it's worth, but set that expectation. Then they can come back and say, well, I don't want to lose you, but I want at least 380. I don't think people are having that conversation. I don't know if they are. Maybe some of the better guys are, but not that I didn't want the commission on it, but we got more for the seller because the tenant wouldn't pony up to the money that they want to start with. If the tenant would have just ponied up to start with, deal would have been done.
Well, what's really interesting there, if you don't mind me chiming in, is, the tenant made a lowball offer, but the seller may not have gone back and asked, what's the best you can do? Which is really interesting because I think you're right, a lot of David, that there may not be that conversation happening where we have a number out there. And because we don't like to negotiate, sometimes people aren't even willing to talk about the number and have the conversation. And so if I had been the tenant and the seller had said, no, thanks, I think we're going to list it, I would have gone back and asked them, where are you looking to be? Right? It goes back to understanding their interests and asking the question about where they want to be. Because I would go back and say, I would like to try to figure this out with you. And if we can avoid having a realtor involved who's going to take a margin out of it, that would be,
everybody needs that realtor.
Exactly. Well, that would be great for us and value for both of us to split.
I think that's why there is realtors on houses and land and everything, is because people don't like to negotiate.
Yeah, yes, in this case, I do believe that the sellers didn't want to have the confrontation with their long-term tenant. They wanted their long-term tenant to buy it, but they wanted someone else to help them set a price. We give them a high, medium, and low, and they didn't really low ball. They came in within, like you said, the anchor. They came in within the data, but the seller said, well, could we get this? Well, I think we can, based on comparable sales data. Well, sure enough, it did. It was worth what somebody was willing to give, but oftentimes we never show our cards of what we're willing to give.
So on the topic of show your cards, though, can we be too transparent?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I think let me touch upon what David said, and then I'll come back to the idea of transparency. It's really interesting, David, that you said people don't like the conflict. Oftentimes people equate negotiation to conflict. But with the 7 elements, I find that the whole methodology is creating value for both parties. And so the way I like to think about it is us working together on a negotiation, right? So it's us working almost as a team collaboratively to figure this negotiation out. And oftentimes a common misconception is we are on opposite sides of the table trying to battle and hammer it out and beat the other side. With that misconception, people absolutely think negotiation's conflict. But if it's rather us working together and figuring it out as something that creates value for all parties, even that slight shift in framing in your mind can make it a lot easier to approach a negotiation. Now, Tanner, I'll flip back to what you asked about being too transparent. I would not advise you ever share the maximum or minimum, depending on what you're doing, that you're willing to go. You have a number, and you should certainly know what range you're willing to work in. So I think this is really interesting as well with buyers. So for example, people go and look at a house, and they have a budget.
Let's
right?
do it a tractor.
Sure. Let's look at a tractor. Let's say we're coming to look at a used tractor, and we've got a budget of about $50,000. We're looking at it, and, it looks pretty good, and it drives well, and it has good navigation and GPS systems in it. And all of a sudden, we're paying $65,000 for that tractor. Why? One thing that we don't necessarily do before entering in a negotiation is thinking through what our own range is in a pretty strict way. So this happens all the time in negotiations, where if we don't define what our own interests are and what our range is, we can easily go outside of it because we haven't anchored ourselves. This happens with a lot of different purchases where we get swept up in things and we don't define the value of them, and all of a sudden we're overpaying. And so we need to know what it is that makes sense for us within our budget and what makes sense within the data, so that we're not going into that situation. And even if you can pay $65,000, I don't want you to go and let them know you can pay that. And I don't want you to pay that if that's not what market rate is. Because if market is 50 to 60, you should not be paying that extra $5.
But isn't the market what somebody's willing to give?
That's what you say the market
They had a good
is.
salesperson. You got the sunroof and the
Well,
It
take
motor.
that tractor. Buyers always give you the negatives. Oh, it needs new tires. They're all worn down. It's got 10,000 hours. And then the seller always tells you brand new paint, fresh motor, etc. You know, they tell the positives, they tell the negatives, and it's the amicable communication in the middle. The problem is we don't communicate. Even at an auction, one-sided conversation. This is why I like an auction. Take her house model for a second. I'm a realtor and I represent Corey, and Corey says, "Man, I'm willing to go this high, but I can't tell that to the other realtor." And we keep him behind the closed door here. You can't. I can't tell you what's wrong. They'll offer this. They'll offer this, and then the other realtor's like, they won't take this. And if we'd all just sit at the same blooming table and have a conversation, or in an auction setting, hey, they want more. You want to give a little more? Yes or no? Yes or no? Boom. Hashtag auctions work.
Didn't you send me a TikTok the other day? It was a wife's perspective. The husband went to an auction.
Yeah.
She was ranting about how they had decided they were going to get their finances in order, and
He went and bought a tractor.
he went to the auction just to look, and he came back with a tractor. Now, granted, it was a 40/20, so it couldn't have been too
bad.
outlandish, but still, it was not in their budget. And so then the next week he wanted to go to another auction, and she sat him down and said,
Here's your budget.
Here's your budget, and you need to stay in this, even though you shouldn't have spent money the last time. And it was a humorous TikTok, but I get where you're coming from. Staying on that topic of a tractor, you know, Corey has a theory for buying things off of Marketplace.
Facebook Marketplace negotiations
Yes.
101.
101.
But in agriculture, I think we find ourselves negotiating with peers probably more often than most businesses, because the asset value and asset exchanges. So to give you Corey's anchoring advice, he says,
Piss them off first with the canned, "Is this available?"
Yes.
Still
And they
available.
don't respond.
Yeah.
and then Corey says you take the asking price, cut it in half, and add $50 to it. So if it's a $10,000 item, you offer $5,050.
Yeah.
And say, would you take that?
See,
Anchor down.
I do similar, but I do it with more people. I'll have 10 of my best friends call them at different times, and they'll all offer about 60%, maybe 65%. So by the time I call at 75, they've wore them down to where it's like, damn, this is the best offer I got out of 10 people today. Let's take it.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing, because what you're doing is you are creating your own competitive market. So what you're having them think is the objective criteria that people are showing me is 60%, and this guy's coming up above market. So what you're doing is create your own market rate.
You're
which
manipulating the market, which is illegal.
I think farm for profit. I think farm for profit.
There's no
needs to
UCC
start
here.
A new service. You know, we've got our Patreon account. We've got listeners, and
We'll have 10 of our buddies
audience.
call on your farm equipment.
Yes.
Yeah.
We should offer a service. So for a low fee, Farm for Profit will get 10 or 12 people to call on a listing. So if you want to buy a combine or a
Or cash
tractor or a
rent.
truck,
We'll call your tenant. We'll offer way less money. Hey, I'm willing to do it, but the most I can afford is this.
$175. Yep.
Make you look like a shining star.
Yeah, and if one of you happen to get it for that low, you get a commission on top of that.
I think we could make this work, boys.
All right, I'm going to reel back in. I'm going to do what Tanner does. How big?
Wow.
Okay, so we're talking tractors here. When someone goes and buys a tractor from a tractor dealer, normally both people know what the tractor is. When someone wants to buy farmland from David, they normally know farms. The people selling it know the farm. Usually, Dave knows the farm. When we're talking cash rent negotiations, a lot of times these are people that have been removed from the farm several generations and have little to no idea of what's going on besides I get a check every March and I get a check every November. How big is education in this factor?
You mean from the tenant?
Yeah, both sides, but yeah.
Okay.
I would say it's huge because what you're doing is educating them with that objective criteria that you found, with that external data. You're letting them know what the marketplace is showing as the value. And I would also say that people really care about the why. So giving them a little bit of information on what the market's doing and how that impacts the land value can be really helpful as well. Because, for example, like you're saying, margins are getting squeezed down and it's a good crop, but the prices aren't going to be great. That information can be really relevant to a landowner so that they can understand the situation that you as a farmer are in.
Would you actually bring some of your finances in? Maybe not like fine detail, but like for this acre or generalities, this is what it's going to cost to put my crop in the ground. This is what the average yields are for this soil type or this field, this area. Like I'm looking at breaking even at that price.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's absolutely fine to do at a high level. I think that's really valuable for them to see, these are my costs, these are my inputs, this is what I can get out of it, and then this is what I'm trying to pay you in a lease, and I need to figure out how to be able to make enough margin to keep going.
Yeah,
I know you hate farm managers, but
I don't hate farm managers.
I actually had a client that they wanted to raise the rent this year, and I did not think the break even was going to be there. So I advised them. So sometimes a third party, comment on the outside can help too.
Because it was already negative to start with.
It was a story Dave just made up.
This is not
the reason. So the reason I'm asking here is like, if you are removed from the farm and you own ground, dollars is your biggest factor, right? Like, not a lot of feel good if you're doing it organic, whatever. I mean, it's dollars. And what they probably go into is what the land market is doing. And if you follow what the land market is doing for buying ground, it has not followed commodities.
So there's a little bit of emotion in farmland. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. If we're selling something, farmland's a different asset than a combine. If I want another combine, I can go to XYZ auction company and buy a combine tomorrow, the next day. If my checkbook is not there, I can go buy it next week or 2 months from now or after taxes or whenever. 2 years, we can plan. What does Iowa State tell us? 62 years, I think it is. Every 62 years, we trade hands on land. So when that farm comes up next to us for sale, there's less negotiation because I'm not going to have the opportunity to buy this asset in my lifetime. Again. Scarcity. It's not there. So we tend to put a little bit of more emotion into it and spend more money, which then inflates that farmland market. But then
if speculators come in and say, well, this is going to go up.
But if rent is following the farmland market, rent doesn't have the same emotion. That
it can't, because when you're renting the ground, it has to pay, right? You're not doing it for charity to lose.
Yeah.
Right. If you're coming in and buying ground for too much money, you either made the money beforehand and you're supplementing other acres, or you're speculating because town's 10 miles away and you think in 25 years it's going to be worth double, triple, whatever.
Or you have so much money that you just want the write-off on being green.
Possibly.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a problem that every farmer wish they had.
But, when you start talking land, $15,000, $20,000 an acre, and then you got these people that don't really know much about farming but own the land. I want 3%. I want 4%. I can go get 5% on my CD or whatever. It just doesn't work that way because there's so many other moving factors to make money on that land. So you either got to figure out something else to grow.
Well, and what's your thoughts on this? Like, what would you tell our listeners? I had a guy the other day, so we just bid a job. Okay, so I'm having a different negotiation. I'm bidding a job. And I said my percent, I'll just make stuff up. I'll say it was 10%. And the guy says, we won't do it for 10%, but we will hire you at 7%. So then I have to, so now the lines have been drawn. I asked 10. This is not the scenario. He asked 7. And I said, look, I know what I'm worth, and I'm not doing it for the practice anymore. It takes 9 or I'm out. So eventually I had to say what my expectations were. It's 9% or I'm out. Yeah. And he said, you know what? I'll do it. 9%. As a farmer, I think we have to say that. Look, I can't make money there. Get rid of the farm and be out, or I can afford to do it at $300 an acre. Whatever. What's your opinion on that?
I think that at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about with alternatives is at a certain point, we get to this position where we can't go any further, right? We have we call it the zone of possible agreement. There's a zone in which we can make a deal. And so you're saying, you started at 7 and 10, 7%, 10%. That was the zone. And you narrowed the zone and you were like, listen, I actually cannot make this work. The zone is 9 to 10 now. You drew a line through the rest of the zone. At a certain point, it is important to say what it is your limit is. And even asking them, why, what is your interest here in owning this farmland? Because there aren't huge returns in a lot of these row crops. And I would love to better understand from you the value of this land to you, because and here's the value to me. So sharing the value that you get and then understanding from them, what is the value you're getting out of this? Because I want to be able to make it work, but this is the range that it truly can work in. And if you do if you do get to a point of alternatives, it can be helpful to share those alternatives almost as a disclosure, because people can get very defensive when it comes to a rubbing point where you're looking at a moment where it might not work. And what happens if we have to walk away? And what happens if someone is offering me more or less? And sharing that as I wasn't going to bring this up because I want to be able to make a deal work with you and I want to make sure that it works for all parties, but someone has offered me a higher price. So I'm hoping we can figure out a range in which this makes sense for both of us. Sharing that in a very delicate way can be powerful. I always recommend doing that later on once you've done the other pieces of building a relationship and you're understanding their interests, communicating effectively, thinking through all the options available to all parties. But at a certain point, you will get down the line to that moment of this works or this doesn't work. And what do we do then?
I got a couple more questions. Email, phone, try to have a personal meeting with them, or letter. Is there one that's better than another?
Great question. I think every negotiation, I have a hierarchy when it comes to negotiations. Top is in person if you can, because again, we're relational and half of communication is body language. So having that body language and having open body language that showcases that you want to work together with them is really beneficial. Second would be video chat, because at least you have the sum of that body language coming through. Third would be over the phone, because you still have intonation in your voice. So you can still convey some tone and some warmth in your voice of wanting to work together. I would stop right there. I would not negotiate any other way. Because, and you might want to confirm things when it comes to the idea of commitment in a negotiation. You would, of course, want it in writing. But when you're actually going and having the back and forth, doing it in any other written form, because you don't have any emotion or any intonation or conveying any of the emphasis behind what you're saying, the way we read words is how we feel in that moment. So if they're having a bad day, they are reading your negotiation letter in the worst form possible. And they're reading every line as this guy is yelling at me.
That hits home a lot.
Very much.
We're going to see if Rachel listens to this whole episode, because that was her and I yesterday. We were texting back
mad?
and forth. I was apparently mad because that's the way it was read. Yeah, I had to send back saying there is no angry tone in this text.
Yeah, it's probably made it worse.
Here's my happy font.
Yeah, it's probably made it worse.
Okay, next question for our listeners. Lots of young listeners. They want to rent more ground.
Mm.
You said, normally I would say, hey, Corey, go send letters. Here's a list of every neighbor farmer. Go send letters to them. But you said, nope, face-to-face. Stop there. How do we get in front of them to have a conversation? Is it just church, coffee? I mean, like what other tips and tricks you got for our listeners that want to rent more ground? I don't want to step on Corey's toes, but I kind of need to step on Corey's toes because I need to expand my business.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, so let me take a step back. If the letter is hey, I'd love to talk to you about this, that's fine. I think that, but I would say if you can meet people through church, if you can grab somebody toward the end of service, if you can go grab them for a coffee, or you run in, they go to a special bakery and you go and run into them there. That's face-to-face is going to be much more impactful.
Farmer Stalker app.
Exactly.
I'm torn on this subject because letters to farmers and cold calling other farmers, landowners, gets a lot of negative publicity.
So does eminent domain.
It does. But at the same time, like as once a young farmer, probably still considered a young farmer, but I've been farming for 10 years or more now. How do you get your name out there? Because you don't have time to go to coffee. You're hustling, doing livestock or off farm jobs or all this other stuff. You should go to church, but a lot of times you got young kids and all that. It's a tough game. How do you get in front of them?
What didn't we hear? And I got to think of how vaguely to say this because I know where we heard it from. There is a young farmer that has put it in their budget that once a month they get a pizza and they take it to a non-current relationship. Just show up. Anybody can use a pizza. If they've already eaten supper, that's fine. They put it in the fridge or whatever it is.
Celiacs.
It's true. But that was part of their item for a marketing budget. Quasi is, I'm going to take you pizza. Most of the time they found out that they would sit there and eat the pizza together.
Yeah.
To have that initial conversation.
Yeah.
I don't know how you choose. Is it pepperoni or beef, sausage?
I would turn it into cherry pie just as a little plug for the cherry industry.
How do we get more cherry land?
It's honestly, it goes exactly back. So we are on a peninsula, and my husband's whole operations are on a really small peninsula that's 18 miles long and a couple miles wide. So the land out here is super limited, and it is truly the relational piece. And I understand that young farmers have families and things are busy, but I would say that the relationship, the time that my husband has been able to take, because I think we would be considered young farmers too, but the time he's been able to take to spend 15, 20 minutes talking to someone when they run into each other at the gas station pays massive dividends. And I think we forget that. We've gotten into this mode where we are all so busy and so chaotic and so hectic, but we all want to be part of a tribe. If you think about our ancestors, we lived in tribes, we lived as groups, we were protected in a tribe, and farmers were the core of that tribe because they provided the most important resource. And we all want to feel like we are connected to our community, and farmers especially still have that connection. And we don't want to forget that connection because that leads to the ability for a farmer who's retiring or a farmer who's thinking about retiring to be willing to come to you because you have had those interactions with them and you are known as a young farmer who's trying to grow, to come to you and talk to you about it. Or you are the person who goes and takes cherry pie or pizza once in a while to people. But those connections...
GPT, make me a logo for the Hillabo tribe.
Yeah, honestly. I mean, I can't... You
Join my
read
tribe.
You read about the loneliness that people have. And this is what people want. They want that connection, and it means so much more today than it did in the past. And so if you're the one willing to make that connection, it's going to pay dividends for you. Maybe not this year or next year, but it absolutely will.
My ancestry comes back Hillbowen.
Well, for the sake of time, I just have one final question before we get some of your contact information. I also know that we have a huge fan of the podcast that feels if you have a high-quality pen and an expensive watch, that provides you extra power in negotiations as well.
Conversation starter.
Only in the boardroom, Tanner.
Oh. Are there tools like that matter?
I don't think so. I think that there's this idea in negotiation of homophily, which is it's actually back to this tribe mentality where I feel like I am actually a little bit a part of your tribe. The three of you would probably look at me and never think that I would have anything in common with you. Let's be real, right? Like we could walk past each other on the street and you'd be like, never in a second would you think that we would have something in common and that we'd be able to talk for an hour and a half. But there's this idea of homophily where you find something in common with someone and you bridge the divide and that difference. And how do you bridge that? And that connection is way more impactful than them seeing a nice pen or a fancy watch.
So that's where I'm going to challenge Tanner. It's not about the fancy pen or the fancy watch. It could be an old tractor. It could be that you pulled in a Chevy truck and they like Chevy trucks or whatever.
Exactly.
You just find commonality.
Yes.
And so I literally had my mom's cat put down while they were on vacation last week, RIP Katniss. And the vet had a Mont Blanc pen in his pocket. And I've got a book on him and everything. And I asked him about it. We talked for 30 minutes on how he went about, like, we have nothing else in common besides he was putting down the cat.
And then he found out that his vet has 600 acres of wonderful farm ground.
That didn't come up. But no, so I would say, it's not about what it is. It's just commonality in my opinion.
Exactly. It could be college football. It could be, college football is such an easy one, right? But it could be any, a hobby or that pen or, a button that you have or a cool fly fishing hat that you have.
Dave's going to show up next time. He's going to have like a pin on his shirt and a ball cap and a watch and everything that you could potentially have as a conversation starter just to see what somebody picks up on.
Yeah.
Now, Dave, I want to know, can you spell homophily?
No, but I did write it down because in my own letters, I think it's great. Bridging the gap, you said.
Yeah.
I wasn't anywhere close. It's HOMOPHILY. Not what I would have done. But
so is it a verb?
Birds of a feather flock together.
That's exactly. And I think Corey said it really well, actually. Commonality. It's what's that bridge? What's the one thing you have in common that you could chat with someone about?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to use that next week.
I think if we have a true listener that went all the way through to the end of this episode, I want to know what is the strangest thing that you found in common with a landlord of yours. Send that in a text or an email. farmforprofitllc@gmail.com. I want to know, is it Kumala? Is it, what's that really stinky fish? Lutefisk?
Lutefisk. Bunch of Norwegians.
Yeah, maybe something like that. But Attia, this has been fantastic. I'm glad that we found you. It was a unique way, listeners, that we got connected to her. And I hope this isn't the last time we get to chat. If our listeners have a question or a scenario, would you be okay if you provided some contact information for them to potentially connect with you?
I would love that. They can reach me through my website. There's a contact form that'll come directly to me. So it's just Attia Qureshi or attiaqureshi.com. And so they can just reach out through my contact form. I'd be more than happy to chat with anyone who has another question.
I will put that in the show notes as well. Guys, I know we've got more questions, but I think we just flat ran out of time today. Yeah. So really appreciate you joining us. This was a pleasure. I hope you had as much fun as we did.
I did. Thank you so much for having me. It was delightful. And I hope it's not the last time either.
That's right. Listeners, we appreciate you too. So until next time, have a good one.